And what I have to discuss with you now is the most serious threat to both our country and your financial security that I've ever come across. Because it could eradicate your life savings, your investments, and your entire net worth. Today I want you to imagine the unimaginable. What if a man with the highest government clearance at the Pentagon and CIA, who has access to some of the most sensitive military and economic intelligence, who regularly briefs the Treasury, and who has testified before the Senate and House of Representatives, walked into your office, sat down, and with a calm voice that did not waver, gave you the following warning: an economic Pearl Harbor is about to strike America. And this was not something he said without understanding its gravity, because as you'll soon learn, the CIA enlisted him to investigate the last direct attack on our country and economy, 9/11. And this time, he believes the outcome could be as severe as the Great Depression, as our already fragile financial system collapses, and the wealth of tens of millions of innocent Americans who aren't prepared is decimated in the blink of an eye from the onslaught. For example, the $50 trillion lost in the recession would be just a drop in the bucket. Picture $100 trillion vanishing from Main Street America and our economy. Picture investment accounts crumbling into ashes, impoverishing even the wealthiest, as the stock market suddenly plunges 50% with no floor in sight. Picture inflation hitting extreme levels that make the 1970s look like a pleasant memory, as what's left of the dollar is eradicated. The struggle to afford gas and food could cause conflict and stress to overcome our society. Now, imagine you are me, and this is what has just been described to you. Who would you tell? And what would you do at that very moment to protect you and your family's financial security? That's what I want to discuss with you today. Now, before I go further, let me tell you about the man who delivered this warning to me, so you can understand with complete clarity why you need to take this seriously. His name is James Rickards, and he is a top security advisor to the Pentagon, CIA, Department of Defense, and the Director of National Intelligence. He's also a powerful lawyer and investment banker who has spent over 35 years on Wall Street. While much of his work is classified, I'm permitted to tell you that his focus is on identifying threats that may strike our economy, financial markets, and average Americans. This oftentimes places him behind enemy lines in some very dangerous areas of the world, including Nigeria, Liberia, Zimbabwe, and Pakistan. His rather unique skill set is the main reason that James Rickards has been called upon by our great nation to intervene directly in some of recent history's most important events. For example, the U.S. government placed him in the heart of the negotiations to free 52 innocent Americans during the Iran hostage crisis that endured for 444 straight days from 1979 through 1981. But that was just the beginning. As you probably remember, in 1998, the large hedge fund, Long-Term Capital Management, almost single-handedly destroyed our economy when its trillion-dollar exposure to risky investments threatened to unleash a financial catastrophe not seen in the previous 60 years. At the time, PBS reported that the long-term capital debacle could put the entire banking system at risk. The Cato Institute, a highly respected conservative think tank, stated that many feared the long-term capital management crisis created the possibility of dire consequences for world financial markets. And the Federal Reserve warned the American people would suffer in a way not appropriate for them to suffer if long-term capital management collapsed. To put it plainly, our meltdown could have happened in 1998 instead of a decade later. That's the story you know. Here's what you probably don't know. James Rickards stopped this from happening when he was recruited to work with the major banks to avert bedlam. Without his efforts, the New York Times predicted the economy would have probably plunged into recession, and it wasn't long before his country came calling again. A few years later, James Rickards' expertise in Middle Eastern financing and his ability to operate in secrecy resulted in top CIA officials placing him in the center of an investigation into one of our nation's darkest hours. I'm referring to September 11, 2001. The CIA enlisted Rickards to examine terrorist ties to a large block of insider trading that occurred on Wall Street prior to the attack. Because of the direct loss of innocent lives, we don't often stop to think that 9/11 was also a strike on our economy as well. In fact, Osama bin Laden even stated this was one of his top priorities on numerous occasions. All in all, it's believed we lost $6.4 trillion when you factor in the loss in market wealth, plus the costs of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that followed. Now, please pay close attention to this. It is important for you to know. For obvious security reasons, James Rickards did not discuss the specifics of his work investigating the 9/11 financial paper trail in great detail with me, but he did say that what he uncovered angered him, and he decided to do his part to ensure it will never happen again. So in the years that followed, he developed and then implemented a system the national intelligence community could use to decipher clues emanating from Wall Street. Clues that could help provide an early warning of a coming economic crisis, and it wasn't long before his worst fears came to reality. You see, in 2005, he started getting signals that our economy and financial markets had become unstable and had reached a code red status. So he began briefing the Treasury on a regular basis. But when, to their surprise, he started pointing fingers at them and the Federal Reserve, his message fell on deaf ears. Look, it's hard for anyone to tell their boss that they are the problem, let alone stand up in front of our government and do it, but that's exactly what James Rickards boldly did. His concerns reached a boiling point at a Treasury meeting when he declared that Ben Bernanke had become more dangerous to the national and financial security of the United States than Al-Qaeda. They didn't listen. Well, we all know what happened next when the recession struck. And now Rickards is seeing those code red warnings again. But this time, the signals are twice as strong, and they are exposing a frightening revelation that could bring down many powerful people. You see, James Rickards uncovered evidence that suggests for the last few years the American government and Federal Reserve have been covertly working together to deliberately commit calculated and unspeakable economic aggressions against not only other nations, but American citizens. So he rushed to testify about his findings before both the Senate and House of Representatives. However, when Congress heard that the blame didn't fall on a Middle Eastern country or on a corrupt Wall Street firm or a terrorist group, but instead fell on the leaders of America, some of whom were present at the time of his testimony, well, as you can imagine, they didn't like his message. So James Rickards turned to the Pentagon, and shortly after, he shared this intelligence with them. The Pentagon brought him to a top-secret facility in Maryland, their Warfare Analysis Laboratory, to recreate a startling scenario of exactly what could erupt in our future, as an economic Pearl Harbor is unleashed on our country, all from a financial war our leaders started, and a global counterattack nobody on Capitol Hill, at the Treasury, or at the Federal Reserve was prepared for. Now, if that wasn't frightening enough, wait until you hear this. Everything could eventually escalate into military conflicts against China, Iran, Russia, or possibly an unknown enemy, because it has happened before, and right now history is being ignored. What James Rickards briefed the Pentagon and Congress on, and later shared with me in our private meeting, is called a global currency war. And it's a war we are going to lose. Unfortunately, Rickards had already learned a hard lesson that sometimes Washington, D.C. ignores the national intelligence community. So, with no other choice, he is now stepping out of the shadows to play the role of whistleblower. And that is why James Rickards came to the Newsmax office to speak with me, because he knows that Newsmax has the power, and therefore the responsibility, to warn the public. As you're probably aware, Newsmax has built a strong reputation for exposing the stories the mainstream media oftentimes ignore until it's too late. It was Newsmax that traveled to Moscow to meet with the former president of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, to discuss a coming war with Iran, well before it was a top headline in the newspapers. It was Newsmax that sat down with former President Bill Clinton to expose China's growing energy dominance, and the threat of a future tax siege on the American public. And it was Newsmax that years ago warned of the cyber attacks we've begun to see now. So it goes without saying that we don't take the threat of an economic Pearl Harbor striking America lightly, which is why we investigated and vetted it thoroughly. So let me ask again. Imagine you were me. Who would you tell? And what would you do at that very moment to protect you and your family's financial security? After all, the scenario James Rickards described to me was truly unimaginable. But with his background, with his credibility, and with the evidence he provided to me, he was not somebody to be ignored. But I knew if I was going to warn the public, to warn you, I would have to assemble a team of experts who could provide you with the exact details on what is about to unfold, and more importantly, how to protect yourself. So, to out this story, I commissioned an Emmy Award-winning director to follow James Rickards and a team of economists that includes the chairman of Forbes Media, Steve Forbes, global market specialist Sean Hyman, and Bob Wiedemer, the author of the New York Times best-selling book Aftershock. Together they investigated and exposed this unimaginable threat to your net worth and our country. The documentary is called Declassified: America's Coming Economic Pearl Harbor, and I'm going to show you never-before-seen footage from this film so that you can understand what's at stake and why this currency war has become such a large concern of the Pentagon, CIA, and our entire national intelligence community. Then afterward, I will show you what I am doing to protect my wealth, and I will invite you to follow in my footsteps.